Think about this for a second. On paper, the United States possesses the most terrifyingly powerful military in human history. We're talking about a defense budget that easily exceeds the next several countries combined. 11 nuclear-powered aircraft carriers, thousands of advanced stealth aircraft, and a sprawling network of bases on almost every corner of the globe. And yet, despite all of this overwhelming technological dominance, and despite well over 4 decades of intense, bitter hostility, the US has never launched a full-scale invasion of Iran.
So that begs a pretty massive question, doesn't it? If the United States has this absolute mountain of military power, why has Iran remained such a difficult country to defeat or force into submission? I mean, is it because Iran somehow has a stronger military? No, absolutely not. The answer, as we're going to see in this explainer, isn't about matching firepower at all. It's actually a really complex puzzle made up of unforgiving geography, civilizational history, and a very deliberate strategy designed to make going to war almost impossible to win.
See, America relies on traditional force projection, stealth bombers, global logistics, unmatched conventional strength. Iran hasn't even tried to build an identical military to match that. Instead, they've leaned into an asymmetric strategy of deterrence. They're using drones, proxy networks, and deeply buried underground facilities. They aren't trying to match the US tank for tank. The goal here is to raise the potential costs of military action so incredibly high that a conventional conflict becomes, well, unthinkable. Let's dive into Layer 1. The fortress of geography, a natural defense system.
To really grasp why Iran's strategy works, you have to realize that military planners don't start by looking at missiles. They start by looking at the map. And the map of Iran is intimidating. The country covers roughly 1.65 million square kilometers. It is one of the largest countries in the Middle East. It's essentially a literal fortress. You've got the towering Zagros Mountains acting as a massive shield in the west, the Alborz Mountains locking down the north, and these vast, completely impassable deserts right in the middle. This sheer scale and rugged terrain means any theoretical large-scale ground invasion would instantly become a logistical nightmare. I mean, it would completely dwarf previous military campaigns in the region. And military planners in Washington are acutely aware of this because of recent history. The US showed off some truly extraordinary conventional military capability in neighboring Iraq and Afghanistan, right? They won those initial combat operations incredibly fast. But stabilizing those countries afterward, that proved to be a completely different story. It cost trillions of dollars and thousands of lives over decades. Trying to invade and hold a country as massive and geographically formidable as Iran would be infinitely more demanding.
Which brings us to Layer 2, the ghost of history. 200 years of foreign intervention. So, if the ground geography is basically a no-go, why doesn't the US just use its air superiority to topple the regime from above? Well, the answer lies in a history that has made Iran's government uniquely resilient. For roughly 200 years, Iran, which outsiders used to call Persia, was essentially treated like a geopolitical chessboard by foreign empires. Back in the 1800s, it was carved up by British and Russian spheres of influence. In 1941, those same powers essentially forced the Iranian leader out. But the real turning point was in 1953, when Iran's Prime Minister, Mohammad Mossadegh, tried to nationalize his country's oil. The CIA and British intelligence actually orchestrated a coup to overthrow him, and they installed a Western-friendly Shah who ruled with an absolute iron fist. And you can imagine, this long, really humiliating history fueled some intense, deep-seated resentment. The Iranian people felt like their country was constantly being sold off to the highest foreign bidder. This deep anti-imperialist anger finally boiled over in the 1979 Islamic Revolution. It was spurred on by figures like Ruhollah Khomeini, who famously told the public that foreign powers had reduced the Iranian people to a level lower than an American dog. So this revolution wasn't just about religion. Fundamentally, it was about making absolutely sure that foreign control would never, ever return. Right after 1979, the country went through a brutal 8-year war with Iraq, and fighting basically alone against a heavily armed neighbor taught them some really bitter lessons. So the new leaders built a system specifically designed to be coup-proof. They established the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, or the IRGC. Now, this elite branch exists not just to defend the country's borders, but specifically to protect the political regime itself. Because power is intentionally so decentralized across different security branches, you can't just bomb a single military base or take out a few top leaders and expect the whole system to collapse. If you remove one official, there's always another one waiting to step right in. Now, Layer 3, the asymmetric web, shifting the costs of warfare. Here's the core problem for Iran.
How does a regionally isolated regime, one that's been crippled by decades of strict economic sanctions that basically stop it from buying modern fighter jets or tanks, fight back against a global superpower? Well, they do it through asymmetric warfare. If you're not familiar, this is a strategy where a conventionally weaker side uses unconventional tactics to offset their disadvantages. So the goal for Iran isn't to beat the United States in a traditional shootout. Actually, scratch that. They know they can't. The goal is to make the political, economic, and military costs of starting a war so painfully high that Washington won't even try. Because they are so constrained by those sanctions, Iran has heavily invested in lower-cost but highly effective technologies. We're talking about vast arsenals of ballistic and cruise missiles, swarms of long-range drones, and highly dispersed, hardened underground facilities. These asymmetric tools really complicate an opponent's planning. They basically negate the traditional advantages of having overwhelming air superiority, which allows Iran to project some seriously lethal force on a tight budget. But this strategy extends way beyond just hardware. Iran is the world's dominant Shia power, and it uses that civilizational and religious depth to project influence everywhere. For decades, they have cultivated proxy militias, groups like Hezbollah in Lebanon and the Houthis in Yemen. And this is a massive deterrent because it ensures that any direct conflict with Iran wouldn't stay inside Iran. It would instantly explode beyond its borders, pull in all these regional partners, and basically turn the entire Middle East into one massive, interconnected battlefield. And that leads us directly to Layer 4, the global fallout, the economic and geopolitical choke point. Because the consequences of a war with Iran wouldn't just be regional, they would be intensely global. Look at this map. A massive share of the entire world's seaborne oil exports passes right through this tiny bottleneck, the narrow Strait of Hormuz, sitting between the Persian Gulf and the Gulf of Oman. Iran absolutely has the asymmetric capability to severely disrupt or even close this strait. Even a limited disruption there would send global energy markets into an absolute tailspin, spike inflation everywhere, and likely crash financial markets worldwide. And this global ripple effect brings up some fascinating geopolitical wisdom from the late Lee Kuan Yew, the founding father of Singapore. He repeatedly warned that while the US gets bogged down trying to reshape ancient societies in the Middle East, it loses focus on what truly matters long term. As he so bluntly put it, true world leadership is decided in the Pacific, not the Persian Gulf. And we are already seeing the real-world proof of his warning. Just recently, the US actually had to withdraw a THAAD missile defense system from South Korea, just to replenish arsenals that were being depleted by conflicts over in the Middle East. As America spends its resources and hardware wrestling with Iran's asymmetric web, global rivals like China quietly benefit. They get to build their own influence while America's presence in Asia gets hollowed out. Now we have to address the nuclear question, the ultimate insurance policy. For Iran, when they look at the recent history of the world, the lesson they take away is pretty clear. Regimes without ultimate deterrence get overthrown. But, as Lee Kuan Yew also foresaw, precision airstrikes alone on Iran's deeply buried nuclear facilities wouldn't eliminate the threat. Sure, you might set the program back a few years, but they have the scientific brainpower and the civilizational pride to simply rebuild it, just deeper underground next time. To actually destroy the program, you'd need a full-scale ground invasion. And as we've already established, geographically and logistically, that is a total nightmare scenario. And the alternative is equally terrifying. If the military strike fails to decisively end their nuclear program, and Iran survives and rebuilds, the fallout is catastrophic. Every wealthy neighboring government in the region is going to instantly conclude that American security guarantees are essentially worthless. The immediate result? A desperate, continent-wide nuclear arms race right in the middle of one of the most volatile regions on Earth. So, let's wrap this up. The ultimate conclusion: beyond military hardware. When you start bringing all these pieces together, this progressive puzzle of deterrence becomes remarkably clear. You have impenetrable mountain geography that shuts down a ground war. You have a paranoid, coup-proof regime born out of 200 years of foreign meddling. You have an asymmetric arsenal designed specifically to bleed a superior opponent. And looming over it all, you have the threat of a crashed global economy and a regional nuclear arms race. The main takeaway from this explainer is this: overwhelming US military power can easily destroy infrastructure. It can win dogfights, it can bomb radar stations, for sure. But as we've learned the hard way, you cannot bomb an entrenched idea. You cannot easily replace a government that has deeply intertwined itself into a massive civilizational state, one that flatly, fundamentally refuses to be ruled by outsiders ever again. Which leaves us with this final, lingering thought. You see, the question was never really whether the United States has the sheer firepower to destroy Iranian targets. Of course it does. But as history shows us time and time again, in the 21st century, the true challenge is understanding the profound difference between winning a military battle and actually winning the peace.